This old lady on the mountain has many stories to tell. She's well over 100 years old now, and I love this place and have come to know at least some of her tales. She has lived several lives. She was the child of daring men with big dreams. A local Montreux architect, Eugène Yost, and promoter and hotelier, Ami Chessé. They were called the Texans of Montreux. Already in those days, Texans were meant to be big thinkers. So born in luxury, in another world, she opened as a hotel in 1902. Then there were about 200 guests and 200 staff. Princes, lords, the jet set of a world before jets. Big names like Kellogg, Rockefeller, Gillette. Writers like Rudyard Kipling, Edgar Wallace, Daphne du Maurier, Scott Fitzgerald. The Maharaja of Baroda and his family were among the guests, as were members of the Russian imperial family. Artists too, like Rubinstein and Stravinsky. The architectural style is called eclectic, which I understand to mean a bit of everything. In the theatre up the steps there, and in the promenoir going this way out of the main hall, the entrance hall, you will find neoclassical Grecian pillars. And here in this hall, you are in the fake medieval, a Swiss designer's idea of what he thought an English lord would expect from Switzerland. Please note the Swiss soldier with an early model of the Swiss Army knife on the chimney behind you, recently uncovered by restorers. And you can see some of the original tables and chairs around the house. These are the original tables and chairs that you can see on the photographs of 1902. I like to say, for the lovers of old things, that our foundation never had enough money to do too much damage. But that old world was killed by wars. Wars, it's an obvious point, are extremely bad for the health of tourist resorts. So in a second life, with the coming of the Second World War, internees and refugees found shelter here. And there's a plaque that I guess none of you have noticed at the railway station, expressing gratitude from the officers and men of the British Empire, escaped prisoners of war, 1943-1944. And down on the terrace, to the left of the Swiss flag flying there, you can see another plaque at the foot of an oak tree that marks the 1,600 Jews who were housed in the Caux Palace in 1944, and also reminds us of those who were turned away from Switzerland's borders to their deaths, a painful part of our history that we've had to revisit. The youngest of them was a little girl of 5 called Sarah. But the big dreams continued, and in the thick of this terrible war that cost 72 million lives, another visionary, Philippe Motu, in 1942, had the thought, and I quote, "If Switzerland is spared, our task will be to make available to moral rearmament," the name of this movement then, "a place where Europeans, torn apart by hatred, suffering, and resentment, can come together. Caux is the place." The thought seemed so extraordinary that he didn't dare to share it with his wife to begin with. So it was a group of Swiss. They were young Swiss, largely then, about 100 of them, families and single people who gave their money to create this place. And some important post-war reconciliations had their beginnings here. When you visit the Caux Expo, our little museum in the wing going that way towards the bookshop, as you should, you will see a photograph of French Foreign Minister and Prime Minister Robert Schuman, one of the architects of the new Europe, standing just outside the main entrance where you came in with Frank Bookman, the founder of IFC. And you can also see a photograph of Konrad Adenauer, his German counterpart, sitting here in the hall in a meeting. But there were thousands of ordinary men and women, what we would today call civil society. Since its beginnings as a conference center, the sufferings of the world have been part of the tapestry woven into Caux year after year. There are many more stories we could tell, and you may discover some of them in the coming days and draw hope and encouragement from them. This conference and this center is founded on the idea that a profound change in lifestyles and attitudes is possible, and that we are all responsible. A big word and a big concept. Initiatives of Change works on the principle that changes in people's motives, attitudes, and behavior are not only possible, but are the only sure basis on which lasting change in society can be brought about. And this is the experience of millions of people, whether involved in IFC or not, who have decided to start the change process with themselves in their own lives. Starting with myself may sound too simple, but there is a certain inescapable logic to it. Building trust across the world's divides, it says, at the top of the homepage of the Caux and IFC websites. Building on a foundation of ethical values of honesty, selflessness, love, and purity. I would like to tell you one story, one of the many that could illustrate the Caux approach. In 1953, a young Tunisian nationalist came to Caux. His country was still then a colony of France, and he lost here his hatred of the French. My wife looks after the Caux archives, and there's some fascinating research work to be done in this treasure trove, now reaching 130 linear meters in the Vaud Cantonal archives. Here's a page of the transcript of what Mohamed Masmoudi said from this platform. I was suspicious and mistrustful, pathologically sensitive. I was dry, and my human matter was sterile. He then talks about having a time of quiet reflection, another of the basic approaches of the House and IFC. And then he talks about writing a letter to his mother. She had been threatened by French gendarmes. They had told her that they would kill him. And she ended her letter to him here saying, "God bless you, my son, and God curse the French." He was writing back to her, "Keep praying for God's blessings on me, because I need them, but stop cursing the French." And he concluded his words from this platform saying, "In my opinion, this is the start of change." He then went back to Paris, and at the IFC center there, he met over a meal Jean Badevant, who was responsible for Tunisian affairs at the French Foreign Ministry. They started to develop a relationship of trust. And here are slides of 2 letters recounting that supper meeting. Badevant and Masmoudi were 2 key members of the delegations that negotiated independence. And one of the independent histories of this period talks of how each of them seemed to have more problems with their own delegations than they did with each other, and that whenever deadlock threatened, the 2 would retire into the garden of the ministry for a private talk. Masmoudi became the first ambassador to France. In 1956, while leading the first Tunisian delegation after independence to the United Nations in New York, President Bourguiba declared, "The world must be told what moral rearmament has done for our country." Robert Schuman wrote to Bookman, "There can be no doubt that the history of Tunisia and Morocco would have been different if it had not been for moral rearmament." And Masmoudi, by then a member of the Tunisian government, said without moral rearmament, we would be involved today in Tunisia in a war to the death against France. Tunisia would now be a second Indochina, building trust across the world's divides. 50 years later, Caux is part of a similar process working towards peace and democracy in Burundi, a work of accompagnement, they say in French, accompanying, walking alongside the politicians, the military, the former guerrillas and civil society as a troubled nation moves into elections. This work of IFC International and Caux is financed by the Swiss Foreign Ministry. But at its heart is the same effort to change motives, to free men and women from hate, to build trust. Such change is at the heart of restoring human security and healing our wounded histories in our societies of today. The French language Swiss radio last week, at the start of this season of conferences, ended their item by saying, "On the terraces of Caux, one can start to build another world." So I look forward to learning about the new stories that will grow out of this week. Have a good stay.